Howdy, all. This is Kyle Whittington, and I am joined by Ben, the Closet Catholic, and we're going to be talking about his conversion story today. So, Ben, thanks for coming, man. Thanks for. Oh, hey, look who's in the chat.
Oh, hey.
So,
Wow, that's a
yeah,
surprise.
yeah, it's almost like I just sent him the link right before, right before the show started.
Crazy.
Um, but, um, but yeah. So, Ben, thanks for joining us. Why don't you just kind of like introduce everybody to who you are, what you're doing, and how'd you get here?
Yeah, so all of that. So, yeah, my name is Ben. I am the Closet Catholic. I am entering the church this Easter, and I've been on this road for a while. I have a channel called The Closet Catholic where I kind of walk through my journey from where I was, which was the Church of the Nazarene. I was an ordained minister there, and the different major things that I wrestled with that led me to Catholicism and to where I am now. So that's a little bit of background on that. I'm missing something, aren't I? I think I'm missing the tell my life story part, aren't I?
Yeah, well, hey, that's what we're here for. So, but I guess yeah. So, what was your faith background growing up?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the Church of the Nazarene, which, for those who aren't familiar, it's very similar to the Methodist Church. It grew out of the American Holiness movement and has more of a Wesleyan theological leaning, even though there are other influences. But that's, who cares? Well, not that no one cares, but it's, fodder for theologians. But yeah, so I was raised in the church. My family was very involved in the church. Actually, my late grandfather served for, from the time I was born until he passed away, as a district superintendent, which is akin to a bishop. So he was pretty well known, very well respected. He was very involved in the denomination. And so, like, that was my life growing up, was the Church of the Nazarene, and I loved it. It introduced me to the Lord. It gave me a love for the scriptures. And later on in life, like when I was about 20 years old, I kind of had that transition a lot of people have, where you go from just happening to be Christian to like owning your faith and actually making it yours and recognizing, no, I'm a Christian because I want to be. So I had a moment like that when I was finishing up my associate's degree in drafting and design, because I wanted to be an architect originally. And a youth pastor of mine that I was very close with, because I worked with the youth group, he helped me understand the doctrine of entire sanctification, which is a distinctive doctrine in the Church of the Nazarene. It's not unique to it, but that's like the main thing of the Church of the Nazarene is sanctification. So he introduced me to that, and it really convicted me of, yeah, I need to make like a conscious decision to follow Christ. Like, because I realized then that, yeah, I'm just a cultural Christian. And it's not that I was ever like, oh, just living in sin all the time. Like I had a relationship with the Lord, but that was the point where it became, I don't know, just something more real about it and more profound of like, I really need to be obedient. Like Jesus was my savior, but now I need to make him my Lord type of transition.
Mm.
Yeah. So it was shortly after that I felt called to ministry. So I know I just skipped like 20 years of my life, but so I felt called to ministry. So I finished my associate's degree, and then I went to a college in Illinois called Olivet Nazarene University, which, fun fact, it used to be, well, the campus used to be St. Viator College, which is where the venerable Fulton Sheen went to seminary. So yeah, I learned that like this last year, and I'm a bit disappointed. I wish I would have known that while I was there.
Yeah.
But so I went there. I did my bachelor's in biblical studies and then my master's in family ministry. And while I was attending there, so up until that point in my life, my relationship with Catholicism was really just ignorance. I just didn't know much about it. I was never an anti-Catholic. My family was never anti-Catholic. It was just wasn't something that we talked about, which, was fine. Certainly better than what it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to college, I was still very neutral on the subject, but a lot of my classmates were Catholic. I think at the time, around a third of the students at Olivet Nazarene University were Catholic. And
Interesting.
yeah, and theologically, the Church of the Nazarene is actually closer to Catholicism than it is to like Reformed theology.
Hmm.
Yeah, and in particular, like the doctrine of sanctification
Right.
is, yeah, like that was actually something that sort of led me to Catholicism in a way. But while I was at college, I started learning more about it, just little pieces here and there that just made me, at the very least, appreciate Catholicism. So I think at that point I was more like sympathetic towards it. I was like, yeah, like I don't understand much about Catholicism, but like the little bit that I do know is really fascinating to me. Like the history of it, the understanding and the reverence for the mass, which I didn't know why, but I just thought that that's a good thing. I don't know why, but that's a good thing. The very high view of the sacraments and like the role of the priest, I just found that very kind of attractive in a way. Not like
Hmm.
personally, like I didn't feel called to be a priest, but just how that role is viewed within Catholicism was just very. I just had a lot of respect for it.
Okay. And
Um,
when did you start learning? Did you find out about all of this like while you were at Olivet or?
yeah, it was bits and pieces, partly
Okay.
from classmates or just conversations that would come up in my theology classes, or one of my professors. I never could figure out what his relationship with Catholicism was because he seemed to know it really well, and he never talked down about it. Everything he said about it was very like reverent and like very respectful, and like he articulated like a lot of like the theological points as things that we should admire and like even draw from as pastors. And like he would
Mm.
have us read like Henry Nouwen. He had us read, I mean, the church fathers, sure, but even recognizing that what they were saying was more Catholic. And he would have us read things like that different priests have said or different bishops. So it was obvious like we were receiving like different parts of Catholicism here and there. And so that had me, like I said, become more sympathetic, even to the point where, looking back, I actually became a bit defensive um, of Catholicism. Or I guess I would be like, yeah, like sort of defending it. Because one of the
Mhm.
things I did while I was at college was I co founded a student preaching ministry, which is still active today. It's called the Olivet Nazarene University Preaching and Music Ambassador Program. It's a really long name. Anyways,
Okay.
so like I would visit churches all across the Olivet region, which is Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And several times when I would visit these churches on weekends, like I would have like the anti-Catholic church, like or the pastor. Like
Ah,
I remember one time I was visiting and a pastor had me watch this movie that was, geez, I don't know who produced it, but it was all like, oh, the Catholic Church is the Illuminati and the Pope is going to be the Antichrist and, you know, all this stuff. They just worship
like
idols.
like something for my low-hanging fruit videos.
Yeah, exactly. Like your low hanging fruit videos. It was like watching Mike Gendron on like crack or
Ugh.
something. But I remember like, but I was watching it, and even though like I was still pretty ignorant of Catholicism, I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I'm not buying this. Like, no, like that's just
Mhm.
ridiculous. And even when I was doing my master's work, I worked as a teaching assistant. So I would lead discussion groups for a freshman level theology class that every student had to take. And there were several of my students who were anti-Catholic, and I would like argue with them because they would like talk about Catholicism, like, oh, well, they just worship Mary. And I'd be like, no, they don't. And let me explain why. So I kind of became, uh, I wouldn't even say an apologist. I wasn't that good, but it irked me whenever people would like talk bad about Catholicism. And looking, I still don't know why, but it just bugged me because a lot of it just sounded like just way too harsh. Because I'm like, look, Catholics are Christian. I don't know everything they believe, but the stuff that I hear people say about them negatively, like it's just not, it's not right. That
It's not true. Yeah.
yeah, which I didn't have like the knowledge that I do now to say why what Catholics believe is true. But it's just funny that I like while I was preparing to be a Protestant pastor, I was like defending Catholicism.
That's
But I
hilarious.
yeah, but I still entered the ministry. So that was certainly a fascinating time. So I would say that is the part of my life where I started to recognize an affinity for Catholicism, at least, and kind of like growing towards like in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brother Andrew's in the chat. He says, sounds like you wanted honest conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well,
I definitely love talking about it too. So, but there weren't. Yeah, I don't blame the Catholics at Olivet for not being a little bit more open about it, given how some people treated them, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's super interesting, and I think I've brought this up on my low hanging fruit videos before. If not, it's coming up in the next one. Is that like if Catholicism is so bad, why do you? It's like I got to make the distinction. It's like I'm not accusing you of lying, but you are spreading lies. Like it's like if it's so bad, why do you have to spread lies to bring it down? Like that doesn't seem like the tactics of Christ. That seems like the tactics of Satan. So
yeah. And I noticed that even in comments on my videos, I've engaged them a little bit, but not much. But it's always, I'm sure you've had this too, where like people will throw out an accusation of Catholicism, and what I say is just, okay, like you say this, what Catholics believe. All right, point me to where the Catholic Church teaches that. Like, and I'm not being mean. I'm just like, you're making a claim, but now you have to back it up. And what I find interesting is most of the time, like the way, okay, so for example, a big one, like Catholics worship Mary, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a basic one like that. And I'm like, okay, like I hear you saying that, and I agree that that's wrong to worship Mary, but where does the Catholic Church teach that? Like, like where are you getting that from? And a lot of times they'll just cite the Bible and like, oh, like, idolatry is stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know, like I agree with you, and I totally agree with what the Bible says, but you're making a claim that Catholics do this, and I want to know where you're getting that from. So you're right. It's like this unintentionally bearing false witness that just, it seems like in some circles it just happens by default. Like that's just what a lot of people believe about Catholicism, and so they just go with it, but they don't really know why. It's just ideas that are out there.
Yeah. Okay. So sounds like you were kind of already at least soft to the idea of Catholicism. Like your heart wasn't completely hardened. You weren't trying to. You were not about to go on a crusade to Rome. But you don't exactly look college aged. So I'm guessing this wasn't like 6 months ago. So what happened in the interim?
I guess my young looks are starting to leave me.
You got to get the beard, man.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I started college, like my bachelor's at 21. So I was a few years behind the curve anyways. But,
okay.
So yeah, I did my bachelor's, did my master's. Then I continued with the process, because in the Church of the Nazarene, in order to be ordained, it's a fairly lengthy process. For me, it was 14 years from start until ordination. Yeah, because you have to meet educational requirements. You have to meet ministry experience requirements, which is consecutive years of active ministry in an assigned role. So like where the denomination recognizes you are in a particular ministry role. Like you're not just a student, you're not just a lay person, like you are doing something, and it's like you got the stamp of approval to do that, and you have to do that consecutively. So I sort of got hung up there because, church bureaucratics just kind of messed me up, but it is what it is. So yeah, so like I was ordained a couple years ago, almost 2 years ago, but yeah, throughout the time I was in ministry, I was still being drawn to, looking back, like very Catholic things. So like I would preach every sermon from the lectionary, like all the time. I followed the church calendar. I just found something so rich about that. Because, like when you're preparing a sermon, it's so easy to prepare a sermon based on just, well, this is what I want to say. And it's like, there's a lot of like psychological stuff that happens with that. And I just didn't like that. I didn't like that, that people on a Sunday could be hearing me interpret and exposit the word of God based on just what I'm personally going through or what I'm personally wrestling with, because that tends to be what determines a lot of times what pastors preach on, who don't follow a set order of preaching. It just has to be, well, whatever the pastor wants to talk about. And I was just like, yeah, like I don't like that because it's too much about me. So I followed the lectionary, which I love because number one, it forced me to step back from myself and say, it's not about what I want to say to the church. It's about what God wants to say to the church. Here's the scriptures the church has recognized and following the lead of the Holy Spirit has outlined as the readings. So, okay, I'm going to follow that. But then also it forced me to preach on texts that I otherwise would never touch. Like there were so many times I was preparing a sermon and I was just like, I've read the Bible before, like cover to cover. I was like, I feel like I've never heard this passage and now I'm supposed to preach on it. So yeah, so I definitely grew a lot. So like stuff like that. And also sort of a side note, a little bit of inside baseball within the Church of the Nazarene, there is it's still more at the academic level, but it's filtering down. And it's affecting a lot of clergy now, where there's kind of a tension of what is the Church of the Nazarene supposed to be? Is it supposed to be more like Wesleyan in its theology? Is it supposed to be more like Pentecostal, American holiness in its theology? And how that's affected clergy is some are taking a very low church approach to how they pastor. So like you can go into some Nazarene churches and it looks like any, market garden style non-denominational church. But then like I've known people who they call themselves the Sacramental Nazarenes. I don't know if that's still a group around, but there are some people who are a part of that movement within the Church of the Nazarene who, if you go into their church, it's almost Catholic. Like I know one guy who lives near me and like he will wear like the priestly garments. He'll wear the stoles. He will talk about the sacraments in a way that's almost verbatim what Catholics would say. And it's just, so you have this huge difference. And I tended towards the sacramental side because I just felt very drawn to that. I was like, you know what? Like Christ instituted these. We need to have a high view of the sacraments. We need to be more involved in like really understanding the theology and understanding the history of the church and where we come from and drawing from the church fathers. And so when I would do studies or when I would prepare sermons, I began to incorporate a lot of church fathers and a lot of the historical writings of the church. And it started getting to the point where I feel like this is something Michael Lofton talks about a lot when he engages Protestants. But I found myself like reading Augustine, for example. And I'll say, wow, I really like what Augustine says here. So I'm going to use that in my sermon. But like the very next thing he says is like affirming the Catholic magisterium. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to use that. And so I came across that again and again. And I realized I was being inconsistent, but I didn't really know what to do with that. Because I'm like, look, I believe God has called me to ministry. I believe this is where he wants me to be. And I believe that he has led the church throughout all the years. So I'm reading what the church fathers have said, but what they're talking about sounds like the Catholic Church. So I'm kind of stuck. So it was at that point, and that was, let's see, about 6 years ago now when I really started to wrestle with that, 5 or 6 years ago. And like I still had like some major hesitations of joining the Catholic Church. It started to be like more in the back of my mind. But my hesitations ended up being just based off of misunderstandings, which I can get into maybe just here in a minute. But then eventually it got to the point where I began to look at it more. And that's one of the positives of COVID is I listened constantly to like debates and discussions between Protestants and Catholics. Because I was like, I realized there's a lot here that I just don't understand that I should probably try to understand. So like, I'm pretty sure I watched all of Trent Horn's videos. I watched like in the last year, a lot of Michael Lofton's videos. So like, various apologists who just helped me better understand things that I otherwise would not have ever like engaged with. So, and that kind of led me to the point where it was like a critical mass where I'm like, okay, like I now know enough about Catholicism that I realize I have to make a serious decision here. Am I going to reject the Catholic Church and remain Nazarene? Or am I going to say, no, the Catholic Church's claims are true, and so I need to become Catholic. And it
Mm.
wasn't just a decision. It wasn't just like an ecclesial decision either. It was like I was recognizing that not just I now understand what the Catholic Church teaches. It was more I recognize that what the Catholic Church teaches is true. And so how am I supposed to respond to that? Well, I'm not just going to reject it, obviously. So then it just became a matter of not so much if I'm going to become Catholic, but when. Because at that time I was
Mm.
still, that was like 2 weeks before I was going to be ordained is when I had that sort of like this is happening. So I'm like,
Oh no.
oh, this is great timing. So yeah.
Dang. Okay, so would you say, like, if you were looking to advance your career as a Nazarene pastor,
Mm.
I'm guessing you would not recommend converting to Catholicism. That sounds a lot like career suicide.
It does throw a bit of a wrench into the process. Yeah.
Okay, I imagine you have to be a part of that church in order to lead that church. Uh,
It does tend to be a requirement.
okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right. So that was about 2 weeks. So did you go through with ordination? I know you mentioned earlier that you got ordained about like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I went through with it because once I realized that point, I mentioned it to my wife. And I was like, okay, like God's leading me to Catholicism. Like I'm pretty sure. And she kind of freaked out. Wait, totally understandable, by the way,
Sure.
because she's a part of this too.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, like, are you still going to go forward with ordination? And I said, well, here's where I'm at with it. Right now, this is where I am, and I feel like I'm here because I've been obedient to God. I don't sense like an immediacy to convert because there's still a lot of questions that I have, like about the
Right.
process, about what it all is. I said, so I'm going to go forward with it because again, this is where I'm at right now. So I'm gonna, still go forward with ordination because I said, like, I don't know when this is going to happen. I just know it's going to. And I said, it
Mm.
could happen like, a month from now. It could happen 10 years from now. Like, I don't know. I just know it is.
Mm.
But there's still a lot of questions I need to have answered before like taking those steps. So yeah, I went forward with ordination. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So after ordination, you're still grappling with these things. Did you ever have to, like, I know usually whenever you step into a new position, at least I've had this in every new job that I've ever stepped into, you get like this imposter syndrome. I imagine that must have been like cranked up to 11 for you. How was that?
Like when I became ordained.
Yeah.
Actually, I was really disappointed because it felt like nothing happened.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like in the role I was in, well, I guess in the Church of Nazarene, you can do pretty much anything as long as you're a licensed minister, except serve at the district level and up. You have to be ordained for that. And so the role I
Okay.
was in, once I was ordained, like it didn't change my position. But one thing I did expect to happen, because this is something I really wrestled with seriously, was the issue of authority,
Hmm.
which ended up leading me to Catholicism. But like I was tired of, so I was directing a young adult ministry, and I was so tired of giving these discussions every week and just feeling like it was me offering the best of my opinion. Like I just didn't feel fully convicted in what I was saying because, like they ask questions like how are we supposed to view like Harry Potter and witchcraft? Like well, the Church of Nazarene doesn't talk about that. Like it says don't engage in witchcraft. Okay, but like what else? Like because some people make a big deal about like can we watch Harry Potter? Like, well, what
Mm.
about superheroes? Like, does that count? It's like they were asking me these questions, and at the end of the day, I was like, I mean, here's my opinion, basically. I don't know what else to
Right.
do with that. I mean, I hope I'm not leading you guys astray. So one of the things I hoped with ordination was I would at least have a sense of some kind of God ordained authority that would at least grant me some confidence that what I'm
Hmm.
teaching people is true. And that didn't happen. Actually, during my ordination ceremony, it was odd because I had like no emotion throughout the entire thing, which was very unusual for me.
Mm.
Because
Did
I'm
that?
like, yeah, because I was like, I spent 14 years of my life working up to this point. I would think I would at least, be excited. or like maybe have a
Right.
tear when they lay hands on me and ordain me. But even like when I'm up there at the altar and the general superintendent's praying over me and the district superintendent has his hands on me too, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I guess
Yep.
nothing's happening.
Oh
So,
man.
yeah.
Man, you know how you said like nothing changed, like where my mind went there immediately. It was almost kind of sounds like it was as if you were like living together with your fiance before you got married, and then when you got married, well, I mean, you're already living together, you're already
Yeah.
doing all that like entailed, so nothing really changed. So it's almost like your wedding day like really wasn't actually all that special.
Right.
Because so like nothing happened. So interesting. Now,
It was
did that make
pretty
you question
disappointing.
like did that make you like question the validity of it, or
Yes, but not directly. So the validity of it was something that I really struggled with. And I'll try to say this briefly. So I always had this idea, and so I was even taught it to some extent, that when you are ordained, they wouldn't use this language, which essentially like there is a charism that is bestowed upon you by the Holy Spirit when you are ordained. Like there is a spiritual thing that happens, like almost to the level of a sacrament. Like there is a unique work of God's grace that happens at one's ordination. But when I was preparing for ordination, you have to go through an interview process specifically for that. And during the pre-interview process, my district superintendent told me, he said, now expect to have this question. Expect to have the question, what are you going to do if we decide to not ordain you? And I said, okay. He says, the way you should answer that is, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because you don't ordain me, God does. And I remember he told me that, and it just clicked in my head like, so this ordination doesn't mean anything. It's literally just a formality, essentially.
ooh,
Yeah. And then that's what it is. Like that's how it's actually treated within the Church of the Nazarene. And some people like to build it up, but really at the end of the day, like that's how it is. So like my view of ordination at that point within my denomination was already kind of blown out of the water, because I'm like, I mean, you've even told me this doesn't matter. So like, what am I supposed to do with that? It's literally just a certificate that grants me the ability to serve on district level committees. Like, but there's nothing supernatural taking place. Like, what is this about? So yes, that was a little disappointing, which also made it easy to, the technical term is resign my credentials.
Mhm.
So, which I did a couple months ago. Well, a few months ago now, almost.
Mm.
Which I thought when I would do that, like I would feel something there too, but I didn't. I literally just sent an email to my district and said, to whom it may concern, as per paragraphs, blah, 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 in the manual, I hereby resign my credentials effective immediately. Like that was literally it. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm not ordained anymore.
Did anybody like reach out to you and just like say, hey, you want to reconsider? Or was it just, thank you, have a nice day?
I was expecting that to happen, but so that was just to my district superintendent, and he hadn't talked to me in, I mean, it's a year now. But he just responded with, are you sure you want to do that? I'll go ahead and take your name off the list of potential candidates for open churches. And which I'm like, I mean, I would assume that'd be automatic. So, and that was it. Because I was expecting something like, you want to talk about this? Like, why are you doing this? You want to get together? Like, no. Which was kind of a confirmation for me that, yeah, this was kind of the right move to make.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting because, oh man, it's, I see this all the time too. And it's just like, if you don't take these beliefs seriously, how do you expect me to take them seriously? And it's actions speak louder than words. So it sounds like, it's just everything about that. It's like they didn't take the ordination seriously.
Right.
Even to the point where it's just like, hey, I'm leaving. And then the response was basically like, later, nerd. And it was just, all right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you resigned that. Now that's gotta be quite the shock. I mean, you went from this high and mighty pastor to now you're one of the mud people like us. Like, So what's that demotion like?
Yeah, it stinks that I can't get paid to be attending a church anymore.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
hard part. Definitely a pay decrease. I mean, yeah, no, it's definitely a shock. In ways that I didn't expect. Like one thing that was tough was like no longer having the rhythm, which so the ministry role I had, I sort of fell out of this rhythm anyways. But like the need to be studying the word, to studying theology, to be teaching and giving exhortation and stuff like that. To like doing exegetical studies. Because that was like a part of my job, and suddenly it wasn't. So it's like, well, what do I do now? Because I don't have anyone to do this with. So that was tough. But the two things I would say that are things that I legitimately grieve about no longer being ordained, or I guess I should say active in ministry. Because actually, after I was ordained, I didn't do either of these anyway, because my ministry role was pretty isolated. But one of them is just the level of intimacy that you have with people as a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, being able to, like, if someone's at the hospital, you just go, and they're okay with that. And in fact, a lot of people sort of expect it, but it's just totally fine. Like, oh, the pastor's here. Like, just being able to be in those situations where, there's high stress, there's a lot of unknowns, like people are scared, and it's like you walk into the room, and just by your presence, it just the mood changes because, oh, pastor's here, like it's like things are going to be okay. So it's kind of like this, like even within my evangelical Protestant bubble, it was kind of like this idea that the pastor is in some way exercising a role in persona Christi.
Mm-hmm.
Like wherever the pastor is, it's like that's a visible representation that Christ is there too. And just to be in that role is, I don't really know how to explain it. But like when I would go visit people in the hospital, I stopped taking my Bible with me because, like, no one wants a Bible lesson when they're about to go into surgery. They just want you there and like to be there. But it's like in the happy moments, like during a wedding one of my church members had, like I showed up like before any of the guests had arrived, like the wedding wasn't even ready yet, but I just like could show up and just be with the family. And it was just family there. But they were fine because it's like, hey, it's the pastor. Of course he'd be a part of this too,
Right.
So that's one thing I miss is just, that level of trust and invitation into people's lives that like some family members don't even get. Just a very, I don't know. There is something about that is just very sweet. I don't know how to say it. Just there's a certain like joy in it. Like there's certainly responsibility, but it's a joy to do that.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds like just to borrow some words that trigger some Protestants. It's like, well, you were kind of serving as a mediator in that you were bringing Christ to people. Obviously not the mediator between God and humanity, but like. Right. And, there's still obviously joy in that because here you are bringing Christ to the people. And yeah, so, and now that you're just a mere layman, you're no longer doing that in a prominent way. So I can imagine that's man, that's gotta be tough. I'd never considered that before.
Yeah. So yeah, it's tough, but it's also, I've noticed it's also in the other direction too. Now that I'm no longer a minister, because one of the things I loved was being around other pastors and like even priests too. That didn't happen very often, but because you are clergy, there's like a fraternal connection with other pastors. Like they'll be open with you in ways that they would never be open with lay people, right? Like I could go to my pastor friends when I was considering resigning from my pastorate position several years ago to do the young adult ministry thing. Like I talked with other pastors about that openly because, hey, like we're all pastors, we get it, like we'll pray with you, we'll give you some ideas about what to do. I could never tell like even one of my most trusted board members that I'm like, yeah, I'm considering resigning. What do you think? It's
Yeah,
just
no,
a
you'd never do
totally
that.
different level. But now like that's shut off too, where
Mm,
like I meet with pastors or like even the priests and even the deacons in my church, and I can just tell like there's this um and I respect it and I understand it. This isn't a complaint, it's just a recognition. There's a barrier there, you know. Like they'll be a little open with me, but they still have a a responsibility role within the church that they need to be guarded from, like being, I don't know how to
right.
explain it, like being too open about things with me.
Hmm.
And that's tough too, because then it's like, it's like, because I know what it was like to be with you as a brother, but
Hmm.
now I have to be with you as a son to a father,
Interesting.
Yeah. So
I
those two things have been the hardest things for me to transition into, because it's like being isolated from both sides. Like I've
Yeah.
lost the intimacy from fellow lay people and also from the clergy.
Yeah, that this is going to be a super lame comparison. So like if you're expecting me to say profound, just please bring those expectations down. The only experience that I have that would be even slightly analogous to that would be like when you work at a fast food place and you know where everything is and everything, and then you quit and then you come back later as a customer and like you're talking to the guy who may even be like started after you quit, and he's just like, "Hey man, let's do this." But to him, you're just another customer. And it's
Yeah.
just like, "Hey sir, please don't tell me how to do my job. I know how to do my job, blah, blah, blah." And it's just like, right, yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah.
You
No.
know.
Yeah. That's not a lame comparison. That's actually a pretty good corollary. Yeah.
Yeah.
To some
So
extent. I mean, yeah, like it's sort of like that. Like here's a place that you were familiar with and you get, but now here's this other person who's like, yeah, I don't know you. Get out of here. Just get your food and go.
yeah, yeah. It's like, I don't
Take
want
your
to hear your life.
communion and go. I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Um,
It's not that bad.
oh wow. So okay. Now, so have you successfully changed careers yet? I know this is all like super
Mm.
fresh. So
Yeah.
are you still looking for work or anything or
So, I actually started a business about a year and a half ago. So I've been cleaning windows like ever since I
oh, okay.
graduated high school, just on the side. And I've run a couple like small businesses here and there, just to make extra money. So I started that where I currently am a couple years ago to try and pay off my student loans, and then like I was starting to get sort of a clientele going, and then the way it happened was it wasn't because I was becoming Catholic. My district had a leadership change, and the way my young adult ministry was set up, it was being financially supported by the district, similar to a
Okay.
diocese. So it wasn't run by a local church. Um, and so after the leadership change, the new leadership said, you know what, we're paying you too much money, and for other reasons that I won't get into, because a lot of them were just okay. It was political, like it was
Hmm.
bureaucratic. They wanted to lower the budgets, so they just said, we're just gonna stop supporting this. So they gave me like 3 months worth of rent, because that's all that my income was to pay for the housing, and just said, see ya, this role doesn't exist anymore, basically. So
Wow.
that was a year ago. So I really had to kick my business into high gear in order to keep a roof over our
Survive.
heads. So
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing, is because I'm a stay-at-home dad most of the time too, because my wife works full time and we have a daughter. So I'll do that, and then on the days that my wife has off is when I'll go out and do work. So that's what I do. I'm a
Hmm.
business owner. I run a window cleaning company. So yeah, so that's what I do
Gotcha.
to make money now. A little bit different
So
than ministry, but you're still having to deal with all kinds of dirt.
gotcha. Okay. So F2 is wanting to know how come you sound so much like Trent Horn?
I almost feel like that's an insult to Trent Horn. I feel like I don't sound like him at all.
It's okay. It's okay. Like whenever I put on the cowboy hat, I'm a discount Jimmy Aiken.
I
So
can totally see that.
you know what? We almost have discount Catholic answers here you know what? We just need a
A little
few more
bit.
pieces to this Captain Planet team.
Yeah, I need to
So,
grow out my hair a little bit more. My hair, I feel like it is like Trent Horn's though. Like that's why I have it so short. Is like I grow an afro. Like that's all I can do with it. It's either short or long, but it's afro. Yeah.
okay. All right, cool.
And Trent Horn, I don't know, F2, how long you've been watching this, but Trent Horn was a big reason why I ended up becoming Catholic. So I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So, all right. Now, you're not into the church quite yet.
Right.
Are you coming into the church this Easter vigil, or?
That's the plan. And the only reason I say it's the plan is so my wife is currently pregnant with our second child, but there's some complications in the pregnancy. So if baby is not looking that great, then she'll be like, emergency delivered. So if something like that happens, then yeah, it could definitely get delayed. Like if I'm in the hospital. Yeah. So that's why I say, it's a when, not an if.
Gotcha. Yeah. So okay. Yeah. Well, for all of y'all, so keep Ben and his wife and his child in your prayers then, because complicated pregnancies are not fun. So I know several of us have been there. So, but so how's the formation been? Like, are you going through RCIA right now, or how does that look?
Yeah. So the parish I'm attending has a pretty good RCIA setup where it's like once a month there's a big meeting with all the candidates and catechumens. And we talk about like a topic, but then there's like weekly small groups. So I've been doing that since sometime last fall. And we've been following the, what's it called? Formed.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like the Catholic.
Like Catholic Netflix or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been following like the Catholic teaching session. I forget what it's called. Symbolon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Symbolon. Yeah.
That's cool. Have you learned anything in there? Anything that like had, I guess during your formation, you're learning about the church. Did anything like pop up and go like, oh, didn't know that? Or has it all been pretty much just kind of smooth sailing there?
Yeah, there's been things here and there that stand out to me and I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. But I actually feel bad for my small group leaders. And I apologize to them early on for this because I'm like, I feel like I don't have really anything to add to the conversation because a lot of this is stuff where, so when I decided to become Catholic, I didn't know any Catholics. None that well. And so in order for me to get to that point of, yes, I'm converting to Catholicism, like I had to answer every single question that I had, at least to a satisfactory degree to where I'm confident in saying, okay, this is okay. Like this is good. And that included Catholic teaching. So by the time I got to RCIA, I'm like, I don't have any questions. Like, I mean, nothing that's holding me back at least. Like, obviously I can come up with questions. Sure. Like there's still stuff that I don't fully understand. Like, like what are the candles at the front of the church about? Like that are by statues. Like I'm not. Yeah. I learned that recently, but like that's not holding me back from Catholicism. That's just a minor thing.
Those are like sprinkles on the ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so that's been interesting for the process. So anyways, to answer your question, there have been some things, but it's more just, oh, that's interesting, rather than like, oh, I never knew that before, type like huge revelation type stuff.
Yeah. So whenever you kind of already touched on it a little bit about like, you had to go through these questions before you did that. But what were the big issues that you really had to grapple with before you could even like attend your first mass?
Yeah. Oh. You mean, okay. So, because I'd attended a few masses before, but like as as an interested party, I guess I'll put that qualifier on it. Yeah, the big one was, what would converting to Catholicism mean for me having a biblical studies background? Because one of the big things I wrestled with, and some people are going to laugh at me, and that's totally fine. I remember sitting in my office when I was pastoring a church. I don't know how it popped in my mind, but considering Catholicism did, it was totally random. And I was like, I don't know if I could ever do that because I love studying the Bible. I love studying the language. I love studying the historical background and the cultural background and stuff. Like I just love that. But if I become Catholic, like the Bible is an answered question, essentially. Like it's all solved. Like,
Mhm.
so there's no use to study anymore. Like, I can just look at what they teach and they'll tell me, oh, this is what this verse means. This is what this verse means. Like, and obviously, like, I came to find out that's not true. Like, the
Mhm.
Catholic Church has only defined like a handful of verses, like in a definitive manner. As in, like
Mhm.
you can interpret this in different ways, but you can't say it doesn't mean this, like, sort of thing.
Right.
Um, so I found, oh, like, actually, yeah, there's still people in Catholicism that like do that stuff. But that was one
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
I was like, I feel like I'm losing my love for the scriptures if I become Catholic. So that was one. And the other one was, funny enough, I never really wrestled with the papacy, because by
Huh.
the time I got to actually wrestling with that, it just kind of made sense. So I was like, yeah, I can get behind that. Whatever. So,
Hmm.
but that was the big one. It was the belief that within Catholicism, everything about Christianity was solved, and there's no questions. You just have to fully submit to whatever the church says in any capacity, essentially.
Hmm.
So I would
Wow.
say that was the biggest hurdle. That in sort of, how do I understand the fact that I do feel God has called me to ministry, but I don't feel He's called me to be a priest,
Hmm.
because that was one too.
Hmm.
Because
Interesting.
I flirted with that at one point. I mentioned to a local Catholic priest while I was single. I sort of joked with him to kind of break the ice. I was like, "Oh yeah, I've considered being a priest before," and like he tried to get me in touch with like the seminarian, like the guy who leads seminarians for the
Mhm.
diocese, and I was like, "Ah, wow, he's." And that's when I was just like, "Yeah, I really don't think I'm called to the priesthood." And then I
Mm.
got married, which I know some people will say, "Well, you can be an Eastern Catholic priest," but even there, I'm like, I really don't feel God calling me there. So it was like, yeah, so what do I do with
Yeah.
that? Right.
Yeah.
So those were the two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, so you can actually be a married priest in the Western, like in the Latin Rite as well, but like that's like your bishop's call. So, like if you ask your bishop,
Mhm,
"Hey, can I be a priest?" He'll, I mean, you've already said you don't feel the call to it.
mhm.
So, like that right there, at least in my very fallible estimation, settles the matter like definitively. Like if you're not called, you're not going to be a priest.
Right.
Um, so, but you mentioned something about like having all the questions answered. I actually have this quote from Pope Francis here, and it is, if one has the answers to all the questions, that is the proof that God is not with him. It
Mm.
means that he is a false prophet using religion for himself. The great leaders of the people of God, like Moses, have always left room for doubt. You must leave room for the Lord, not for our certainties. We must be humble. So,
Yeah. James White has entered the chat.
oh yeah, well there you go. Um, yeah,
No,
because
I like that quote. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, no, and if y'all want to know what context that quote's going to be used in, tune into Reason and Theology tomorrow on for Authentic or Not.
Ooh.
So yeah, there we go. I plugged that to my grand total of like 11 people watching. So, but anyway, all right. So we do have some questions in the chat. So
Sure.
Richard is asking, did you believe the church started on Pentecost?
Yes. Sorry. Oh, was it did I believe? Yes, I did. And actually, so this was a part of what I mentioned towards the beginning, that I kind of became uh a defender of Catholicism while I was preparing to be a pastor. So while I was a teaching assistant, um, like I taught all my students, like, yeah, the early church was Catholic. Like it was a Catholic church. Like the Catholic Church is 2,000 years old. It just, you had the Protestant Reformation that led to all of these. So when I encountered like actually started to think about the historical reach of the church, I had no problem saying, yeah, the early church was Catholic, absolutely. But also, along with that, I never held the idea that, well, the Catholic Church just lost it somewhere along the way. I was never convinced of that. I was just sort of agnostic about, is the Catholic Church today the same as the one that was at Pentecost? I didn't really know. I didn't have an answer to that. So, but yeah, I absolutely believe that the church started at Pentecost and it was Catholic.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Let's see here. So Nikki's wanting to know if you have found a good Catholic Bible study group yet.
No, I haven't, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I would recommend.
after my RCIA is done, I believe it's transitioning into kind of like a Bible study, which is another thing I like about how my parish does it. Like when you're done with RCIA, like you're like very much encouraged, like, keep being involved, keep meeting, keep doing stuff. And then I don't know how that transition happens, but I know that there is a group that's going to be starting after RCIA is done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. Yeah. One thing that I would also highly recommend is actually Bible in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz. It might not be like to your it might not be to your satisfaction being like a biblical scholar. I don't know. Would you call yourself a biblical scholar?
I guess I would.
Okay, gotcha. So
I'm not a very highfalutin one, but
yeah, I really do appreciate the Bible in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, because it's just like a piece of the Bible every day, and with commentary. And I guess for like us mere mud people, of which you are now a part of,
mud people.
Yeah, once you start once you start listening to that, honestly, like you now know the Bible better than like probably a good 90% of everyone. Because I mean, he really does like lay that foundation for that like deeper understanding, as opposed to just the me and my Bible authority.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about that. I just have to do it.
Yeah, although that's really encouraging to hear that your parish doesn't just like, okay, RCIA, and then Easter Monday is here, and then they're just like, okay, bye. See you next Sunday. Kind of one of those things. It sounds like they're going to continue that community, which is really encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So, all right. Now, Cactoid Jim is asking, what do you think of the Catholic Charismatic movement?
I'm okay with it. I'm not openly defensive of it, but I do see like in some Catholic groups, like I know the Catholic subreddit tends to be negative toward the charismatic movement. I'm okay with it, partly because my background, the Church of Nazarene used to be the Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene, but it's just not as extreme as like the Pentecostal movement ended up becoming. So that's why it dropped the name, actually. But so like I've been around, some things like speaking in tongues and, like the gifts of the Spirit. But in most of my experience within Protestantism, it tends to be abused. Again, from my experience, that's what I've seen. To where it's like, well, you're not a good enough Christian unless you experience like a charismatic renewal within your spirit, right? Unless you're baptized in the Spirit and can speak in tongues, like you're just like a nominal Christian, or just like, a base level. But if you want to be a real Christian, like you have to have the spiritual gifts. So that was my experience with it. So anyways, the parish I attend is actually a charismatic parish. And I'm fine with it. Because I've looked into it enough to where I'm like, yeah, I feel like the Catholic Church knows what they're doing with it. And it's not just, just, oh, here's a movement of the Spirit. Let's just, do whatever. Like it feels more like the Catholic Church has a better understanding of what that's about.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Actually, whenever we were talking about, I can't remember who I was listening to somebody today, and it was talking about how whenever like this new thing comes along, and they said it is better to like reject an angel than to accept a demon. So like if something new's come along, like, and St. Paul tells us if you resist the devil, he'll flee from you. But like if you resist something good, like it'll continue coming back. So a little bit of resistance whenever something like that comes up, I think is healthy. But whenever it comes to like the authority of the church or something like that, it's like if this has the backing of the authority of the church, then okay, that must make it fine.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, so Richard is back in the chat saying what about Luke 13:7? So just for the sake of the conversation, I'll go ahead and pull that up. I've already pulled it up. So it says, so he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, for 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? So if you see a connection there, I'll go ahead and let you do that. Otherwise, I've got something to say about it.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the connection is. I agree with the passage, but I don't want to say too much if I'm just totally missing something that's being communicated there.
Yeah. So so what I will say to Mr. Richard here is saying that it seems that you're trying to get at the point that the Catholic Church has not bore any fruit. To which I would just say, look around at literally all of Western civilization, because the Catholic Church built all of it. So the fruit of the Catholic Church is all around us. So I really don't see the point there. Anyway, moving on. So Nikki's got another one here. She's asking, what devotions do you like? Rosary, Divine Mercy, etc.
I haven't done the Divine Mercy. I have done the Rosary. Actually, last Lent of last year, I felt like I needed to pray the Rosary during Lent.
Ooh.
Yeah, which was really different for me. but I did it, and it ended up being leading me to, like, I felt a very strong devotion to Mary afterwards, which I was not expecting at all. So yeah, I like the Rosary. I pray it. I try to pray it every day. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Very good. All right. And then let's see here. Oh, okay. Now, one of the questions that pops up a lot in like Catholic conversion stories is, why not Eastern Orthodoxy? So was that even something that entered into the equation at all?
It was. Originally, that's where I was looking.
Oh.
So the first time I really started, I guess I'll put it as the first time I was trying to, I don't know how to say it. Anyways, I was wrestling with my tradition's theology. I'll phrase it like that. And the first thing I really started to look at was Eastern Orthodoxy, because I didn't really like the idea of the whole Pope thing. I didn't know why. I just didn't really like it. I don't think I ever spoke against it. I just didn't like it. So I looked at Eastern Orthodoxy first because I really loved the liturgy. I loved the sacramental view. The theology was actually very, very similar. I don't know if I'd say more so than Catholicism was, but it just felt very similar to what I was taught. Like, I'd hear people articulate Orthodox theology, and I'm like, yeah, like that's a great way to say what I feel like I already believe. It's said better. So I was looking there, but then it got to the point where, and this is just my experience, but I felt like I was in a similar position as I was within Protestantism, where, okay, if I believe Eastern Orthodoxy is true, okay, but now I have to figure out which communion do I belong to, because they're not all together. And I felt like that was the same thing as Protestantism, where like I had to figure out, like I had to look into each one and figure, okay, well, which one is closer to the truth? And I just felt like if I'm going to do that, then what's different than just remaining Protestant at that point? Obviously, that's a bit reductionist, and I know people can tear that apart, and that's fine. That's just how I wrestled with it. And then I started looking at Catholicism, and it wasn't a matter of, well, I don't like Eastern Orthodoxy, so I'll default to Catholicism. It was more I started looking at Catholicism and realizing actually a lot more of what's happening here is jiving with the things that I'm wrestling with, and is actually answering a lot of the questions that I have that Eastern Orthodoxy doesn't seem to be able to answer in a meaningful way for me. So,
yeah. No, it's really interesting. Actually, so Cactoid Jim, he's in the chat here. I did an interview with him. It's the hashtag James White made me Catholic guy.
Nice.
But he was kind of talking about too of how like Catholicism was definitely not his first choice. Like he actually kind of like came into the church by trying to disprove it. He was just like, oh, I've disproved other religions. I guess I'll do Catholicism now. And then, well, now he's a Eastern Catholic guy. So, but it's really cool. So, all right. So that does make sense, because I've kind of always like responded to the question of like, or it's usually not a question whenever they're on YouTube. It's just become Orthodox. And it's just like, my response to that is literally always, yeah, which one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, so anyway, and then Cacto Jim's got another question here. So he says, which saints do you most identify with? Have you selected a patron?
I'm wrestling with the confirmation saint one. Saint
Mm,
Joseph for sure. Partly
hmm.
because like I take my role as a dad very seriously, and that's a very like central part of my life. But also
Yep.
being a business owner and like really seriously working to try and provide for my family. So I've always resonated with him. Also, Venerable Fulton Sheen. I really feel drawn
Mm,
to like his articulation of the faith and how he can take like very difficult and weighty concepts and discuss them and almost like translate them so that the average person can understand it. And I've always admired that sort of thing. I've always tried to emulate that myself too. So I've always been an admirer of Fulton Sheen, and that's why it was hilarious to me that I realized Fulton Sheen attended St. Viator College, which the college I attended bought out, and one of the original buildings that was a part of St. Viator's was a building that I had like all my theology classes in. So yeah.
nice. Okay, well that's cool. Yeah, no, I feel like picking Saint Joseph is kind of a cop out, honestly. Like only losers pick Saint Joseph, and I say that 'cause I pick Saint Joseph. So, but actually, so if I could do it all over again, I would probably choose Saint Benedict. But that's just because I feel like as men, like we already all like have a natural patronage towards Saint Joseph.
Hmm.
So if you're struggling between the two, I would say like, go ahead and go for Fulton Sheen then, because you kind of already belong to Saint Joseph
Yeah.
in that regard. So
Yeah. I've thought about it and I was like, well, how would Sheen feel if I chose him? Or like if he knew I was wrestling between him and Saint Joseph, I feel like Sheen would be like, just go with Saint Joseph. He's better than me.
well, if it
But
makes you feel any better, this is not a universal practice of the church. Like
yeah.
Dom Dalmaso of the Logos Project, I asked him when we were hanging out once, like, "Hey, like, who's your confirmation saint?" He's like, "I was confirmed in France, and we just didn't do that over there, so I don't have a confirmation saint." He says, "Though if I did, I'd pick Saint Francis de Sales." So, but yeah, that's yeah. So like, don't sweat it too much. It's not a permanent thing.
So I
Or
have a
it's not a
question
yeah. Go
on
ahead.
that. So I know within Catholicism, there's like folk theology that happens, like various superstitions. Like if you're selling your
Little T
house,
tradition.
yeah, like bury a statue of Saint Joseph upside down in order to sell your house
Yep.
faster, like stuff like that. So when it comes to like confirmation saints, one of the things I heard, and it shocked me, they said, "Oh, pick a confirmation saint, and that person will pray for you until you like meet them in heaven." And I'm like, is that one of those folk traditions within Catholicism, or
Yeah.
is that actually like a thing?
So when we talk
Like, is that
tradition,
true? Sorry.
yeah. So when we talk tradition, it's very important to it's important to distinguish between sacred tradition, or as a lot of times what we call capital T tradition, and then there's tradition, little t tradition. So the Saint Joseph statue thing, that's going to be one of those like small t traditions.
Yeah.
Is it true? I mean, maybe. Is it offensive to the faith? No. So a lot of those things of like it's acceptable to believe these things, but you're not required to believe them, if that makes sense. So you do get some of these like folk traditions that like do it, because I think that Saint Joseph statue thing is like a very Italian thing. So, but yeah, you'll get different traditions from different cultures in Catholicism, and yeah, that's just where that comes from. So you can pick them up, you can leave them alone. It's your call.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And yeah, so Kate Chisholm says, "Don't bury Saint Joseph upside down." Is it superstitious? Okay, so this conversation actually came up on my Discord server recently about superstition. Is okay, so it sounds like, oh, bury a St. Joseph statue in your front yard and your house will sell faster. It's like, that sounds a lot like superstition. Well, and it could be. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like, oh, it's not, because it really depends on the intent of the person. The superstition comes in whenever you believe that your actions determine the actions of God. So what that means is like, if I do this, then God will do this. And it's just like, and it's like in kind of a way that it's a force of nature, almost as if, I turn this lever and the water comes out, kind of one of those things. Like, that's not how that works. Usually, you've got like the brown scapular and stuff like that, and there's promises attached to that. But like the reason why those things are not, they're not superstitious is that like they're founded on promises made by Mary or by God, which I suppose like promises by God through Mary. But so that's why those things are not, they don't have to be superstitious, if that makes sense. So, so do you have any other questions or anything?
Like me or the chat?
Oh yeah. Well, no, the chat's been great, because I think like most people like threw up a couple of different questions, but yeah, no, are there any topics that you wanna that you'd like to touch that we might not have gotten into otherwise?
Oh, I didn't prepare for that. I mean, so I guess I would say this. So before we started recording, you brought this up, and I thought it was interesting you brought it up. It was interesting that I had already experienced it, but like the rad trad movement. Because I've gotten some of that. Like from people who've heard of them becoming Catholic, people like, oh well, make sure you go to like a traditional Latin mass church, because they'll teach you like the faith the best, like better than like a Novus Ordo or something like that. Or even like Sedevacantists or Bedevacantists. I just find it interesting that that's something that I encountered before, like getting to this point. Like even like wrestling with that. So I can see the temptation for converts to go that direction, and I do feel like that is drawing to some people, where it's like, oh, like it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. I feel for some, where it's like, oh, like I can take the tradition and I can take like the beauty of the mass, but I can reject like some of like the papal claims, so I don't have to fully have like that submission of intellect and will for the magisterium. So it's like sort of like being a Protestant Catholic.
Yeah,
that doesn't make sense, but yeah.
If you've been around, it makes perfect sense. Now, okay, so how'd you get through that? It's like 30. I guess if you see somebody heading down toward that rad trad like road, what would be some resources that you would recommend to them to say, hey, maybe go check this out?
Oh, definitely Reason and Theology. Michael Lofton deals with that, and I feel like he does it in a charitable way, but is also like open about it. And I feel like he's helpful because he deals with it in a way where it's like he follows it to its logical conclusion. So he's not like someone who just says, oh, if you're a rad trad, then you're just messed up and wrong. Like he walks you through why that's the case, like why it's dangerous to go that route and what the conclusions are. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I wish I would have found him earlier. But yeah, I would say that's a good resource for sure.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Now, Shlamalama is asking, which church father is the most interesting to you?
Which church father is the most interesting? Oh geez, so many.
While you're thinking about that, I could answer mine.
Go ahead.
Even though I'm sorry, Mr. Llama or Miss Llama, I'm not actually sure. My personal favorite church father is going to be Saint Ignatius of Antioch, and it's actually to the point where, like, we've got our fifth kid on the way. If we're having a boy, which my wife is like almost certain that we are, he will be named Ignatius. And the reason why I think that he's the most interesting church father is because that if you accept his writings as accurate, you pretty much have to be Catholic. So that's why it's like I love Ignatius of Antioch. But anyway, go ahead.
I mean, that's a tough one. I feel like Polycarp for some reason. I just feel because he's so early, and because his death is like a main testament to not so much icon of veneration, but relics. The relics of the saints, which I feel like that tends to be, in some of my conversations, a big like turn off for Protestants. Which is funny because it's in scripture. Like you have the bones of Elijah, you have the cloak of Jesus, you have Paul's handkerchief, but for some reason they just get thrown out the window. They're just sort of treated as like these weird anomalies in scripture. Like, oh, well, that happened, but whatever. But then Polycarp's death is like a testament to like, no, like all throughout church history, like people have recognized that like our physical bodies and the bodies of the saints in particular are like, how do I want to say this, are so loved and respected by God that he can work through them, and sort of recognizing that. So I just find Polycarp's martyrdom kind of very fascinating in that way. And I don't know why that's not discussed more, but it could just be me.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because I know Polycarp comes up a lot because, like, you know, I brought up Ignatius of Antioch. There's like, you know, Ignatius was his disciple, and Polycarp was directly a disciple of John the Apostle. So, like, yeah, you know, it's like, actually, that's a church father that I haven't actually looked into at all. But the relic thing, you know, I don't know. Have you seen anything from Itzia Girl Sang? And I'm not near cool enough to say her channel name with justice.
I have no idea.
Okay, I did an interview with her. Like, she's a Protestant YouTuber, and I actually met her in person for the first time in Steubenville just you know, a couple of weeks ago. And she posted it today that like our little interview that we did is going to go up next week. So I'm actually really excited to see that. Nice. But on a stream, she found out about relics, and like you mentioned, like her first initial reaction was, "That's weird." That, you know, is like, yeah. He's like, "Y'all Catholics are crazy for, you know, whatever doing that." And it's just like, whatever. But you know, she's off YouTube for Lent right now. But Hallelujah, she's literally like everywhere.
Oh, that's her.
No. Hallelujah is in all the live chats. Like, she's not in this one because
I was gonna say, like,
Lent.
she's not Protestant.
No. But no. So she did on a stream. She was just like, okay, you know, it's kind of, you know, relics are weird. Well, Hallelujah was like, well, hey, no, consider this. And like, I was in the live chat too, and I was just like, hey, consider this. But Haley recommended, hey, you're in this place, and Pittsburgh's not too far away from you, and there's like the largest collection of relics who, you know, in North America, in Pittsburgh at St. Anthony's Chapel. And she went and checked it out. And she can't, the very next stream, she was like, y'all, I got to apologize. You know, I called relics weird. Y'all, that was beautiful. And I did an interview with her like afterwards. It's on my channel. Just kind of like debriefing her experience. And she was just like, it was completely beautiful. Like her mom was having a religious experience there, which was amazing. Cause like her mom's a Baptist. Her mom bought rosaries, and like it was a really, really cool story. And but yeah, no, like saying she's as nice as she is honest. So like I will give my highest I'll give my highest recommendation for her channel. But
nice.
But yeah, so okay, but anyway, that about wraps it up. So let's see here. We got yeah, so anyway, if there is nothing else, I just want to thank all y'all for your time. Thanks for watching. Ben, thanks for coming on, and yeah, I'll see y'all next time.
Yeah,
God bless.
Thanks for having me. All right.